Welcome to this video. In here we're going to talk about residuals and residual plots. A residual is the difference between an observed value of the response variable and the value predicted by the regression line. So what does this sentence mean? Well, let's find out. Every individual has a residual, and positive residual, which it means that it's under-predicted. If it's a negative residual, then we over-predicted. And residual, you can also write shortened like that, is observed minus predicted, which is also equal to y minus y hat, and it all equals to error. So residual is another way to say error. You will always construct a residual plot when performing linear regression. Residual plots tell us if the pattern we chose for regression, in this case linear, is appropriate for our data. If there is an obvious pattern in our residual plot, then our choice of regression is inappropriate. So let's first define what will the residual plot be. So what is the x and y axes? So first of all, the y-axis will all be residuals. And what's the x-axis then? So x-axis, you may think maybe it's the x values, or maybe it's the y value, or maybe y hat, but the correct answer will be the x values. And most of the cases, the x-axis will be in the middle of the graph. So it will not be the graph that we usually draw by ourselves, which the x-axis will be at the bottom. It will typically be in the middle, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So here is a like a screenshot from my graphing calculator, like what does a residual graph actually looks like. And sorry, it does not completely show fully, but you can get the idea, right? So if we say that this is the residuals on the y-axis, then the x-axis will be the number of boats in this case, which also is the individual variables. And you will just label some numbers. On the test, you don't have to label the numbers unit by unit. That will be tedious. So what you can just do is plot some numbers showing the reader then what the pattern looks like on the residual plot, and make sure it's completely random. So here is something I want to show you, the residual plot. So here are some check marks. You will have to make sure your residual plot match each of them before you go on for further steps. So residual plot, first of all, it has to have roughly equal numbers of positive, negative residuals. So the numbers on the x-axis and the okay, so sorry about that. The number on the above x-axis and below x-axis should be roughly the same. So just as the example I showed right here, it's really hard to move the screen. Okay, so if you can see from here, this is how a roughly equal numbers of positive and negative residuals will look like on a graph. Second step is no fan shape. And what is a fan shape? So imagine that the x-axis is the middle vertical line of your fan, and if your data showing a kind of like a triangle on both above and below the x-axis, then it's a fan shape. So a fan shape can look like this. It can also look like that. If there's a fan shape, then the residual plot, or like the original LS, the linear graph does not apply here. You have to linearize them or change it to another form. And the third step is to see if there's pattern or not. You have to make sure that the plots on your graph is fully random. So if it's showing like a quadratic graph or like any shape of the graph, it is not allowed. So here is a paragraph right here I want you to think about. So because in a lot of the cases that the free response will be asking you to explain your model, like how can you tell that the residual plot is appropriate right here. So most of the cases they will asking you, does this model work? And what you can write is, first of all, say the R squared. The R squared is let's just say a number 89.7%, which is relatively high, and the residual plot has an equal number of positive or negative residuals with no fan shape and no pattern. Therefore, the model does work. So make sure to emphasize all of those key points right here with the r-squared, which is the thing that we talked about last video. And here is another thing. I'm so sorry, like it's really just not showing the full picture, but this is like, for example, like this is the coordinate points that are given to you. Find the residual, you use y minus y hat. Y is the true value and y hat is your predicted value. And you will use that to create a y equal to mx plus b function, and plotting the values in, find the predicted number of deaths for 500k boats. Okay, so this is the scenario we talked about in class, and you can also do it. I mean, like, you don't have the scenario, so we're just gonna skip that for a second right here. So yeah, so this is all for this video, and basically I just want you to have a general picture of what does a residual means, and some key information that you're going to be pay attention to when you're doing your FRQs or anything